Lucien Grant. The name alone could make grown men sweat. In the rough-and-tumble world of the frontier, where fortunes were won and lost on the turn of a card, Lucien was king. His icy blue eyes, never blinking, had stared down countless opponents, emptying their pockets and shattering their dreams. He was a phantom, drifting from boomtown to boomtown, leaving a trail of empty wallets and broken spirits in his wake. Deadwood, Dakota territory, at the tail end of the poker season. The air in the Golden Nugget saloon hung thick with cigar smoke and anticipation. It was the last big game before the winter snows shut everything down, and every gambler west of the Mississippi had come looking for one last score. The Nugget was a cacophony of clinking glasses, nervous coughs, and the shuffling of cards. Lantern light cast long, dancing shadows across the faces of the players, etching lines of greed and desperation into their features. The tension was a tangible thing, a heavy blanket draped over the room. Tonight, though, felt different. There was an edge to the anticipation, a sense of foreboding that went beyond the usual high stakes. A storm was brewing, not just outside the saloon doors, but within the very heart of the game itself. Lucien, seated at the head of the table, could feel it too, a prickling unease that even his years of experience couldn't quite explain. Then he saw him. A figure detached itself from the shadows near the entrance, moving with a quiet grace that seemed almost unnatural. He wore black from head to toe, a long, black coat, a black hat pulled low over his eyes, and even black gloves that seemed to swallow the light around them. He was a stark contrast to the dusty browns and faded denims of the other patrons. The stranger paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling directly on Lucien. There was no recognition in his eyes, no surprise, just a cold, unwavering focus that made the hairs on the back of Lucien's neck stand on end. It was as if he had been expected, as if his arrival had been foretold. Without a word, the stranger began to walk towards the poker table. The saloon, already tense, seemed to hold its breath. Conversations died down, the clinking of glasses ceased, and all eyes followed the man in black as he made his way through the crowd. He moved with a purpose, an inevitability that brooked no argument. He stopped directly opposite Lucien, pulling out a chair and sitting down without asking permission. His movements were deliberate, precise, as if every action had been carefully rehearsed. The air around him seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. He looked at Lucien with eyes that held no warmth, no hint of humanity. "Evening, Mr. Grant," he said, his voice a low, smooth drawl that sent a shiver down Lucien's spine. "Care for a game?" Lucien, despite the chill that had settled over him, forced a smile. "A game? I never refuse a challenge." He tried to keep his voice steady, projecting the confidence that had served him so well over the years. But even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. The dealer shuffled the cards with practiced ease, the rhythmic snap a stark contrast to the heavy silence in the room. He dealt the first hand, and the game began. Small bets were placed, feelers sent out, as the players sized each other up. But all eyes were on Lucien and the stranger. The stranger casually tossed a single gold coin into the pot. "I'll see your bet," he said, his voice still smooth, "and raise you a memory." Lucien frowned. "A memory? What's that supposed to mean?" The stranger's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. "Remember that night in Redemption Gulch, Mr. Grant? The burning stable? The choice you made?" Lucien's breath caught in his throat. Redemption Gulch. That was a part of his past he had buried deep, a secret he thought was known only to him. How could this stranger possibly know about it? His eyes narrowed, studying the man in black with renewed intensity. This was more than just a game. This was a reckoning. The temperature in the room seemed to drop even further as Lucien realized the stakes had just been raised far beyond anything he could have imagined. This stranger knew something he shouldn't, and the game was only just beginning. The mention of Redemption Gulch sent a jolt through Lucien, a sudden, sharp pain like a phantom limb aching. For a split second, the smoky saloon dissolved, replaced by a flickering inferno. He saw the terrified eyes of the horses trapped inside the burning stable, the frantic shouts of the townsfolk, and the agonizing decision he had been forced to make. Flashback. A younger Lucien, barely more than a boy, stood silhouetted against the fiery glow, his face etched with anguish. The stable doors were blocked, the flames were spreading rapidly, and there was no way to save both the horses and the town's water supply, which was stored in a nearby well. A desperate choice had to be made, a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his days. He remembered the weight of the axe in his hands, the sickening thud as he... In flashback, the image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Lucien gasping for breath. He blinked, trying to clear his head to regain his composure. The stranger's eyes were still fixed on him, unblinking, knowing. Lucien forced himself to focus on the cards in his hand, trying to ignore the pounding of his heart. He had to regain control, to regain his edge. He couldn't let this stranger see how deeply he had been affected. He met the stranger's gaze, a flicker of defiance in his own. "I call," he said, his voice regaining some of its former steel. "Show me what you've got." The stranger laid down his cards, a pair of aces, seemingly unbeatable. A collective gasp went through the saloon. But it wasn't the cards that held their attention. It was the slow, deliberate way the stranger revealed them, his eyes never leaving Lucien's. "Aces," the stranger said, a hint of triumph in his voice. "But you see, Mr. Grant, some things are more valuable than a winning hand." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. He flipped it open, revealing a faded photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Lucien's face paled. He knew that locket. It belonged to Sarah, the stranger whispered, the name heavy with unspoken grief. "Do you remember her, Lucien? Do you remember the promise you made? The promise you broke?" Another wave of memories crashed over Lucien, this time even more vivid, more painful. He saw Sarah's face, radiant with love, then twisted with betrayal. He heard her voice, soft and sweet, then filled with anguish. Flashback. Lucien and Sarah, young and in love, stood beneath a starlit sky. "Promise me, Lucien," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "Promise me you'll never become like your father. Promise me you'll always choose the right path, even when it's hard." Lucien, filled with youthful idealism, readily agreed. But life had a way of twisting even the best intentions. In flashback, the memory faded, leaving Lucien reeling. The stranger's words had hit their mark, striking at the very core of his being. He had broken his promise to Sarah. He had become the very thing he had sworn to avoid. And now, it seemed, he was about to pay the price. The game was no longer about money. It was about his soul. The next hand was dealt, and the stakes escalated sharply. The stranger, seemingly unfazed by Lucien's initial defiance, continued his relentless assault on Lucien's past. With each bet, he revealed another piece of Lucien's history, another secret shame. "Remember the gold mine, Lucien?" he said, tossing a stack of chips into the pot. "The one you cheated your partner out of? Poor old Jebediah, I never stood a chance." Lucien flinched. That was another memory he had tried to bury, another moral compromise he had made in his relentless pursuit of wealth. He could feel his control slipping, his usually sharp mind clouded by the weight of his past. His plays became erratic, his bets reckless. He was no longer the cool, calculating gambler who had once dominated every table he sat at. He was a man haunted by his demons, desperately trying to outrun a past that was rapidly catching up with him. The other players, sensing his vulnerability, began to circle like vultures. They raised him, re-raised him, pushing him to the brink. Lucien, normally a master of deception, could no longer hide the desperation in his eyes. The stranger watched him with an almost clinical detachment, as if observing an experiment. He seemed to derive a cold satisfaction from Lucien's torment. With every hand, the stranger tightened the noose, drawing Lucien closer and closer to the breaking point. Lucien's flawless game was falling apart. He was losing, and he knew it. The stranger's words about Jebediah opened the floodgates to another memory, a more complete picture of that fateful event. Flashback. Lucien, younger but already hardened by life, stood in Jebediah's ramshackle claim. Jebediah, a grizzled old prospector with a heart of gold, had struck it rich, finding a vein of gold that promised to make them both wealthy. They were partners, friends, sharing a dream of a better life. But greed, like an insidious weed, had taken root in Lucien's heart. A ruthless businessman offered Lucien a fortune for his share of the mine, far more than Jebediah's share was worth. Lucien knew Jebediah would never sell, clinging to his dream of independence. The businessman suggested a solution, a way to acquire the entire mine without Jebediah's consent. It involved a rigged accident, a claim of incompetence, and a legal maneuver that would leave Jebediah penniless. Lucien wrestled with his conscience. He knew it was wrong, that it would destroy Jebediah. But the lure of wealth, the promise of power, was too strong to resist. He justified his actions, telling himself that Jebediah was too old, too naive to handle such a fortune. He convinced himself that he was doing it for Jebediah's own good. He went through with the plan. Jebediah was ruined, left with nothing but bitterness and despair. Lucien, now wealthy, tried to assuage his guilt by sending Jebediah money anonymously, but it was never enough. He knew he had betrayed his friend, and the weight of that betrayal had haunted him ever since. In flashback, the memory ended, leaving Lucien trembling. He wasn't a monster, not entirely. He had simply made a series of bad choices, each one leading him further down a path of darkness. He was a flawed man, a victim of his own ambition. And now, that ambition was about to cost him everything. A hush had fallen over the Golden Nugget. The clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations had ceased, replaced by an almost palpable silence. The other gamblers, initially focused on their own hands, had become captivated by the drama unfolding between Lucien and the stranger. They sensed that something far more significant than a poker game was taking place, a reckoning of sorts. They watched with a mixture of fascination and apprehension as Lucien's carefully constructed facade crumbled before their eyes. The fear they had once felt for him was replaced by a morbid curiosity, a desire to witness the downfall of the man who had once seemed invincible. Lucien's desperation was now plain for all to see. His eyes darted nervously, his hands trembled, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. He was sweating profusely, his once immaculate clothes now stained and disheveled. He looked like a cornered animal, trapped and terrified. He tried to bluff, to regain some semblance of control, but his attempts were clumsy and transparent. The other players, emboldened by his weakness, called his bluffs with glee, further depleting his dwindling stack of chips. The stranger, in stark contrast, remained calm and composed. He watched Lucien's struggles with an almost detached amusement, his eyes like chips of ice. He was the puppeteer, and Lucien was his marionette, dancing to a tune of regret and remorse. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, a taut string stretched to the breaking point. Everyone knew that something momentous was about to happen. The stranger pushed all his chips into the center of the table, creating a mountain of ivory and gold that seemed to dwarf Lucien's remaining stack. It was a bet so audacious, so improbable, that a collective gasp rippled through the saloon. No one, not even Lucien, had ever seen so much money wagered on a single hand of poker. Lucien stared at the mountain of chips, his mind reeling. He didn't have nearly enough to call. He was trapped, checkmated. But it wasn't the money that truly terrified him. It was what the stranger said next. "But the real stake, Mr. Grant," the stranger said, his voice barely a whisper, "isn't money at all. It's something far more precious to you. It's the truth about what happened to your brother, Daniel." Lucien's blood ran cold. Daniel, his younger brother, who had disappeared years ago, presumed dead. It was a wound that had never healed, a secret he had guarded fiercely. No one knew the truth about Daniel, about what really happened that fateful night. Or so he thought. "You see, Mr. Grant," the stranger continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips, "I know everything. I know how Daniel died, and I know your role in it. If you fold, I will reveal the truth to everyone. Your reputation, your fortune, everything you've built will be destroyed. But if you call, well, let's just say the consequences could be even more dire. Lucien was faced with an impossible choice. He could fold, sacrificing everything he had built, or he could call, risking something far more precious, his very soul. The game had reached its climax, and the final hand would determine not only his fate, but the fate of his buried past. The stranger's words about Daniel unleashed a torrent of suppressed memories, the full, horrifying truth of that night finally surfacing after years of denial. Flashback. Lucien and Daniel, both young and reckless, were riding through the mountains, transporting a shipment of stolen gold. Daniel, impulsive and hot-headed, argued with Lucien about dividing the spoils. The argument escalated into a brawl, a desperate struggle for control of the gold. During the fight, Daniel stumbled, falling down a steep ravine. Lucien, horrified, rushed to the edge, but it was too late. Daniel was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Lucien panicked. He knew he would be blamed for Daniel's death, that he would face the hangman's noose. He made a terrible decision. He covered up the accident, burying Daniel's body and claiming he had been ambushed by bandits. He lived with a lie ever since, the guilt gnawing at his soul. He tried to forget, to bury the memory, but it always lingered, a dark shadow lurking in the corners of his mind. In flashback, the truth was out, at least to Lucien. He now understood the stranger's motives. The stranger's face seemed to soften, just a fraction. "I am Daniel's son," the stranger said, his voice filled with a quiet grief. "I came to learn the truth, and now I know it. But more than that, I came to see if there was any good left in you, Uncle Lucien." The consequences of Lucien's past actions had finally caught up with him, embodied in the form of his nephew, a living reminder of his betrayal and deceit. The game was no longer about money or reputation. It was about redemption, about facing the truth and accepting the consequences of his choices. Lucien stared at his cards, the faces blurring before his eyes. He held a decent hand, nothing spectacular, but not entirely worthless. In any other circumstance, he might have tried to bluff, to salvage something from the wreckage of his evening. But now, bluffing was out of the question. The stakes were too high, the consequences too dire. He looked at his nephew, Daniel's son, and saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, a desperate plea for redemption. He saw the pain and grief that Lucien himself had caused, the legacy of lies and deceit that had poisoned their family. He thought of Sarah, of the promise he had broken, of the man he had become. He thought of Jebediah, cheated and forgotten, and of the horses trapped in the burning stable. His life had been a tapestry of bad choices, a downward spiral of moral compromise. He knew what he had to do. He could no longer run from his past, no longer hide from the truth. He had to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful they might be. But could he do it? Could he sacrifice everything he had built, expose his darkest secrets, and risk the scorn of the world? Or would he cling to his reputation, to his wealth, and condemn himself to a lifetime of guilt and regret? The choice was his, and the clock was ticking. The final hand was about to be played. It was time to decide. Fold or call. Which path would he choose? The weight of his decision pressed down on him. A bead of sweat trickled down Lucien's temple as he reached his decision. He looked at his nephew, a silent promise passing between them. Then, with a deep breath, he pushed his remaining chips forward. "I call," he said, his voice hoarse but resolute. The saloon erupted in a murmur of anticipation. All eyes were fixed on Lucien and the stranger, waiting to see what the final hand would reveal. The air crackled with tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. Lucien slowly revealed his cards. 2 pairs, kings and queens. A respectable hand, but not unbeatable. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest, for the stranger to reveal his own. The stranger paused for a moment, savoring the suspense. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he laid down his cards, a straight 10 through ace. A winning hand. A collective gasp went through the saloon. Lucien had lost. He had lost everything. His money, his reputation, and now, it seemed his last chance at redemption. But as the stranger reached to claim the pot, Lucien spoke again. "That's not all," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "I have one more card to play." He reached inside his coat and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. It was his diary, the repository of all his secrets, all his sins. He placed it on the table, next to his losing hand. "This," he said, "is the truth about Daniel. Read it and let the world judge me." He had lost the game, but perhaps, just perhaps, he had finally won something far more important. The chance to be honest, to be free. The stranger's face was unreadable as he looked at the journal. The stranger picked up the journal, his expression still unreadable. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first few pages. The saloon held its breath, waiting for his reaction. He read for what seemed like an eternity, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Finally, he closed the journal, a flicker of something akin to understanding in his eyes. "It's all here," he said, his voice soft but clear. "The good, the bad, the ugly. The truth about Daniel, about Jebediah, about Sarah, about everything." He looked at Lucien, his gaze piercing but no longer filled with hatred. "You lost the game, uncle," he said, "but you may have won something far more valuable, a chance at peace." He pushed the pot of chips towards Lucien. "Keep it," he said. "It's blood money, but maybe you can use it to do some good, to make amends for your past mistakes." Lucien stared at the chips, then at his nephew. He had lost everything, and yet he had gained something he never thought possible: forgiveness. He had faced his demons, confessed his sins, and offered himself up for judgment. And in doing so, he had found a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild his life, to become a better man. The game was over, but the journey was just beginning. He had lost, but he had also found. Lucien never gambled again. The fear he once inspired was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. He used the money to compensate Jebediah's family, a small step toward atoning for his past. He couldn't erase the darkness, but he could try to create some light. The townsfolk, knowing the truth of his past, regarded him with a mixture of pity and respect. He was no longer the feared gambler, but a broken man trying to piece himself back together. Daniel's son, his nephew, remained in Deadwood for a time, helping Lucien navigate the complexities of his newfound honesty. He never fully forgave Lucien. The pain of his father's death ran too deep. But he offered a chance to earn back some measure of trust. Then one day, he was gone, vanished as mysteriously as he had arrived, leaving Lucien with the weight of his past and the glimmer of a possible future. The golden nugget slowly returned to normal, the story of Lucien Grant becoming a legend whispered among the gamblers. Some said he found redemption, others that he was forever haunted by his past. The truth, perhaps, lay somewhere in between. The events in Deadwood left their mark, a lingering unease, a reminder that even the most hardened heart can be touched by conscience, and that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of resurfacing. Whether for good or ill, remained a matter of perspective. The wheel keeps turning.